Don Johnson, the legendary star of the series Miami Vice, is now 75 years old. However, his journey hasn't always been as glamorous as people might think. After facing financial struggles and losing all his money, Don Johnson made an impressive comeback. In today's video, we will explore Don Johnson's life, how he overcame challenges, and what he looks like now. Don't forget to let me know. Have you ever heard about Don Johnson's life story before and after losing all his money? What do you think about his journey? If you find this story interesting, leave a 1 in the comments if you're already familiar with Don Johnson's challenging life, or a 0 if this is the first time you've heard of it. And while the world praises him as a legend, behind the spotlight, Don is going through one of the most painful realities. But how did he lose it all? And at the age of 75, how is he facing life now? Once you hear everything he's been through, you'll never look at him the same way again. From poverty to Hollywood's golden years. Before we talk about his downfall, you need to understand just how famous Don Johnson was. In the 80s, if you were looking for a fashion icon, it was hard not to think of Don Johnson in Miami Vice. He became known for his white suits, pastel shirts, and no socks. He practically invented this style, and it became iconic. By the late 80s, Don was earning millions each year. He had hit TV shows, chart-topping songs, and movie contracts. He was wealthy, famous, and at the top of the world. Don wasn't just rich, he lived more lavishly than most. He owned multiple luxurious and expensive properties, including a massive ranch in Colorado, a mansion in Hollywood, and a luxury apartment in Miami. His car collection consisted of only the biggest brands, Ferrari, Lamborghini, and Porsche. He was living the American dream, but in an even bigger way. From the friends he hung out with, it was clear that he was on a whole different level. We're talking about Jack Nicholson, Barbara Streisand, Melanie Griffith, and even a young Leonardo DiCaprio, who later dated his daughter, Dakota Johnson. Don's life seemed perfect until everything came crashing down. But before the yachts, pastel suits, and million-dollar contracts, Don Johnson's life was nothing like a Hollywood star's. In fact, he came from a place far from Hollywood. Donnie Wayne Johnson was born on December 15, 1949, in Flat Creek, Missouri, a small town in the heart of America. His mother was only 16 when she gave birth to him, and his father was just 19. They were essentially kids raising kids while struggling to make ends meet. Money was tight, and life wasn't easy. When Don was young, his family moved to Wichita, Kansas, where he grew up. Don didn't really have a fairy tale childhood. His family was working class, sometimes barely getting by. There were no acting classes, no silver spoons, and no Hollywood connections. Additionally, Don revealed that both of his parents were often absent and always stressed. In an interview, he once said, "I had an unloved childhood, and my parents divorced when I was 12 and I was the oldest. I wasn't really happy and left home when I was 16. Yes, he left home at a very young age, but no matter how many challenges he faced, Don still had a spark within him. He had a rebellious charm, a kind of personality you can't teach. In high school, he was a bit of a rebellious guy. He often got into trouble. He was good-looking, confident, and full of energy. And guess what? He knew it. So deep down, he wanted more than just the small-town troubles. He wanted something bigger, In fact, Don believed that being born into such a tough and challenging environment fueled his desire for something greater. He once said, "I faced so many challenges as a child, not physically but emotionally and mentally. But later I realized that it was the spark that ignited my creative flame, and those challenges gave me the fuel I needed." So how did the guy from Kansas, struggling through life, become a Hollywood star? It all started when he joined the high school drama program to earn extra credits. He joined out of necessity, but his teacher saw something special in him and cast him as Tony in West Side Story. That was the moment Don got bitten by the acting bug, and the stage fell in love with him right from the first performance. In an interview, he said, "The moment I stepped on stage, it was like a drug. The audience showed me love, and that completely made up for what I didn't get at home." After graduating high school, he decided to pursue his dream seriously. He enrolled at the University of Kansas after receiving a partial scholarship and studied drama. This was the beginning of a long and adventurous journey in the entertainment industry. Later, he left and moved to the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco, a place that has trained many big names in the industry. And that's when the doors began to open. In the late 60s and early 70s, Don started landing small roles in theater productions and independent films. Nothing big or glamorous yet, but it was certainly a start. One of his first films was a bold, post-apocalyptic movie called A Boy and His Dog. It became a cult classic and helped Don gain some recognition, even if it was just a little. But at that time, he was still far from fame. Throughout most of the 70s, Don wandered around Hollywood, taking on roles in low-budget films and guest spots on TV shows. He had to navigate the industry on his own. He faced constant auditions, rejections, small roles, and doubts. However, in 1984, after more than a decade of almost becoming a celebrity, it finally happened. Don Johnson had his big break when he landed the role of Detective Sonny Crockett in a new crime show called Miami Vice. No one expected it to become a cultural phenomenon, but when the show aired, it truly became a sensation. Don didn't just play a cop. He became a fashion icon, a heartthrob, and a symbol of coolness. The sleek suits, fast cars, and pet alligator made Miami Vice an incredibly stylish and unique show that changed the way television was perceived. Suddenly, Don Johnson was everywhere, on magazine covers, in music videos, and on talk shows. People weren't just watching Miami Vice, they were obsessed with it. He started earning thousands of dollars per episode. And with 5 successful seasons, he went from struggling to find roles to buying mansions and vacationing in Europe. In an instant, the boy from impoverished Kansas became one of the biggest stars of the 80s. And Don didn't stop at acting. He also ventured into music. In 1986, he released a pop-rock album called Heartbeat. And guess what? It actually became a success. The title track became a hit, and Don appeared on the Billboard charts. He even held live concerts and recorded duets with artists like Barbra Streisand. Was he the best singer in the world? Probably not. But at that time, Don Johnson could do anything, and everyone loved him. By the end of the 80s, Don Johnson had it all: a hit TV show, a growing music career, millions of dollars, countless movie offers, and a luxurious lifestyle filled with yachts, red carpets, and designer everything. His rise to fame wasn't just impressive. It was the kind of Hollywood fairy tale everyone dreams of. But as we know, the higher you go, the harder you fall. And for Don Johnson, that fall came swiftly. He began making a series of mistakes and poor decisions, which led to him losing everything, not just financially, but also in his personal life and relationships. Don Johnson's tumultuous love life. When it comes to romance, Don didn't just date. He made headlines. We're talking about some of Hollywood's biggest stars, whirlwind marriages, breakups, reconciliations, and even a love story that gave us a Hollywood star daughter. Don Johnson's heart was just as famous as his pastel suits, and at times even more chaotic. But let's start at the beginning. Did you know that Don has been married about 5 times to 4 different women? In fact, 2 of those marriages were so short that they were annulled within just a few days. To this day, the internet still doesn't know the identities of these 2 women. However, Don has revealed that one of them was a dancer and the other was a wealthy woman. It was a youthful love, the kind of impulsive romance that many rich and famous Hollywood stars experience. However, his love story really got interesting when he met Melanie Griffith. Don and Melanie met while they were still quite young on the set of the 1973 film The Herod Experiment. Their relationship certainly attracted attention from the start, but the two really couldn't stay apart. When Melanie turned 18, they got engaged. They married in January 1976, and by July of the same year, they had separated. A few months later, in November, they officially divorced. All of that in just a few months. It was a passionate, tangled relationship and completely in true Hollywood style. But here's the surprising twist. This wasn't the end for Don and Melanie. In fact, they got back together more than a decade later, proving that they truly had something special for each other. In 1989, they remarried, and this time, it was even bigger. They welcomed their daughter, Dakota Johnson, who would later become a huge star. However, unfortunately, this second marriage also didn't last. By 1996, everything came to an end. Melanie later shared the struggles that made their marriage tense. She said, "He wasn't an angel. He wasn't easy." Don, on the other hand, revealed that despite their breakups, the love between them remained strong. He said, "Some people are just meant to be together." And I think that's true for Melanie and me. That's why we married each other twice. I don't believe that if you love someone, that love dies. It changes and becomes something else. To this day, they maintain a close relationship. They co-parent Dakota, and occasionally you can still see them publicly supporting their famous daughter together. But let's talk about the other women in his life. Because even when Don wasn't married, he was still busy with high-profile relationships in Hollywood. Relationships so complex that the press couldn't help but cover them. Did you know that Don dated Barbra Streisand? Yes, they were a famous couple in the late 80s. They were the epitome of a Hollywood power couple. Glamorous, powerful, and full of surprises. However, this romance didn't last. He also dated Patty D'Arbanville, a model and actress, who became his long-term girlfriend in the early 80s. They lived together for several years, but never got married. They even had a child together, Jesse Johnson, who is now an actor. Not only that, but there was also Uma Thurman. In this case, there were a lot of rumors, and they were spotted together in the early 90s. However, this relationship was short-lived and faced some backlash due to the age difference between them. Don also had a relationship with Jody Lynn O'Keefe, and this one really turned heads. Don and Jody worked together on the show Nash Bridges, where she played his daughter. However, they quickly started dating, and the media went wild. Considering Jody was only 18 and Don was in his late 40s, their relationship lasted for a few years and definitely sparked a lot of criticism. Don wasn't shy about dating younger women, and this only made him the center of constant gossip and controversy everywhere. But after all the breakups, reconciliations, and dramatic relationships, Don surprised everyone in 1999 when he finally settled down for real. And this time, it lasted. He married Kelly Flieger, a kindergarten teacher and socialite from San Francisco. She had a completely different demeanor from the glamorous Hollywood women he had dated before. And perhaps that was exactly what he needed for this relationship to succeed. Kelly was 27 years old, and Don was 49 at the time. But despite the age difference, their marriage remained strong. They've been together for over 2 decades without scandals, without drama, just a quiet, stable, loving life. Together, they have 3 children, and Don often acknowledges that Kelly helped him find balance and become a better man. After decades of living wildly, she was the calm in the storm of his life. But before Kelly appeared, Don had lived a very wild life, and that lifestyle was the very thing that destroyed him and caused some of his greatest losses. Don's struggles with addiction. To be honest, when someone rises quickly and reaches the peak like Don Johnson, there's often a darker side behind that glamour. And for Don, it wasn't just the pressure of fame or the stress of Hollywood. It was something much deeper. Because while the world saw a confident, cool, untouchable star in a white suit and Ferrari behind the scenes, Don was battling demons that nearly destroyed everything he had built. That's right. Fame became a dangerous game, money got tangled, and Don Johnson's life began to spiral out of control. After Miami Vice exploded, Don became one of the most famous people on the planet. He was wealthy, handsome, and dating the top stars of Hollywood. He could have anything he wanted, but along with that lifestyle, there was something else. Some people call it the dark side of Hollywood fame. Don started partying nonstop, and in the 80s, the party scene wasn't just about drinks and casual dancing. It came with illegal substances and other addictive drugs. Hollywood was full of temptation, and Don didn't hold back. He worked long hours on various projects, and when he wasn't filming, he would head to clubs, throw parties, and do whatever he could to ease the pressure. In later interviews, Don admitted that he got caught up in these bad habits due to the pressures of Hollywood. He said, "When I was young in Hollywood, drugs and partying were everywhere, and it was hard to stay away. It didn't become a problem right away. It took time and led to some bad decisions." That's right. His immersion in these habits and the addiction they brought laid the foundation for poor decisions, ultimately leading him to financial ruin and bankruptcy. Alcohol gradually became his escape. It was his way of coping with anxiety, fame, loneliness, and the constant expectations that came with life as a Hollywood star. But as anyone who's been through it knows, it always starts out fun and then ends in chaos. The partying and drinking began to affect everything: his career, relationships, and even his health. By the early 90s, cracks started to appear. Sure, Don was still famous. He had even started another successful series, Nash Bridges. But he was no longer the golden boy he once was. There were rumors about mood swings and erratic behavior, including a controversial conversation he had with two morning radio hosts, Ron Diaz and Ron Bennington, where he insulted and threatened them while drunk. Eventually, he was hospitalized for treatment, though the official details were kept private at the time. But later, he admitted that he had reached a point where he could no longer hide it. Drinking had taken over his life, and he knew that if he didn't stop, he would lose everything: his family, his career, and possibly his life. It was a wake-up call, but it forced him to face the truth. Although his struggle with addiction was a painful battle that led to many poor decisions, nothing could have prepared Don for the financial difficulties that were about to come. And it all started with a controversial event that changed everything: a documentary scandal. In 2002, Don Johnson was no longer the charming, promising young man he once was. However, he was still famous, still charismatic, and still flying on private jets around the globe. Then, suddenly, Don reappeared on the news. But this time, it wasn't because of a new role or a red carpet event. Instead, it was for something incredibly concerning and controversial. To this day, this event is still considered one of the strangest and most unbelievable moments in his career. In November 2002, Don Johnson was flying across Europe. He landed at the German-Swiss border, a place often frequented by billionaires and bankers for very special and private reasons. But as usual, customs officers checked his luggage. What they found in Don's briefcase was something very unusual. In fact, it immediately raised their suspicions. German customs officers discovered financial documents related to bank accounts worth over $8 billion. These weren't just bills or tax papers. These were high-level sensitive financial records, investment papers, and documents related to large international money transfer transactions. This immediately raised suspicions among the customs officers. They detained Don for questioning and swiftly launched an investigation into possible money laundering. For a while, things became very serious. A spokesperson for the German Customs Investigation Agency told reporters, "There is reasonable suspicion that Mr. Johnson is working for someone else. If everything were legitimate, you wouldn't need to transport documents worth this amount of money in a car." And so the officials began to dig deeper into who these accounts were linked to, where the money would go, and what Don's actual role was. Was he working with international banks? Was he part of a larger scheme? Or was he just the face of something darker? Immediately, the news made its way into the media. It quickly turned into an entirely different story. Some tabloids even started to speculate that Don might be part of a larger financial conspiracy. Others suggested that he might have been duped and unknowingly carried documents for shady businessmen. However, Don immediately clarified that he had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. He explained that he was simply traveling with business partners and that the documents were part of a film financing deal. He stated that he wasn't transporting money, only paperwork. He firmly asserted that nothing illegal was happening. Fortunately, after the investigation, the German authorities agreed. They dropped all charges and dismissed the case just a few weeks later. No charges, no arrests, just a lot of confusion. But the scandal still haunted him. And even though Don Johnson wasn't convicted, the damage was done. The headlines were brutal. The internet exploded. And for someone who had already dealt with many rumors about his personal life, this scandal was just adding fuel to the fire. People started asking questions like, is Don secretly going bankrupt? Is he involved in risky business, or is he just associating with the wrong people? Suddenly, he wasn't just a former heartthrob with addiction issues. Now, he was a former heartthrob connected to an $8 billion financial mystery. And it didn't matter that he was cleared. In Hollywood, scandals are avoided at all costs. The entire negativity surrounding it led to Don losing several contracts. In fact, this scandal marked the beginning of the financial struggles that Don would face later on. Even after overcoming the money laundering scandal and clearing his name, Don's financial issues didn't just disappear. In fact, they were only beginning. By the early 2000s, the glamour had faded, and his roles were becoming fewer. But instead of saving or investing wisely, Don continued to spend as if money would never run out. We're talking about multiple houses, luxury cars, expensive divorces, child support, and the costs just to maintain the Don Johnson image. It was a huge mistake, one that would ultimately cost him everything. Then came the business investments. And this is where things started to get messy. You see, Don began investing in things he didn't fully understand. And those wrong choices began to accumulate. Even though it was clear that his income wasn't stable, Don continued to live extravagantly. His financial foundation started to crumble. Each month brought new bills, more debt, and the cash flow kept decreasing. It was the typical downfall of a star, outwardly wealthy but in reality struggling internally. However, the hardest blow came when he nearly lost his $1 million home in Aspen, Colorado. Don had owned this stunning property for many years. It wasn't just a house. It was a 10,000 square foot paradise located in one of the most expensive areas in the U.S. But in 2004, everything was on the brink of slipping through Don's fingers. According to court documents, Don Johnson had failed to pay a loan of $930,000, and the bank began threatening to seize his home. The situation was so dire that they were just hours away from repossessing the property. However, he was saved at the last minute when some financial backing suddenly appeared. To this day, it's unclear how he managed to escape this situation. Some say it was an anonymous investor. Others believe Don borrowed money from wealthy friends. A few people in the industry even claim that he sold off personal assets, possibly paintings, jewelry, or cars, just to cover the loan. But whatever the case, he narrowly avoided disaster. However, the damage was already done, and the world now knew that Don Johnson was facing serious financial difficulties. He owed millions of dollars, not just to one lender, but to several creditors. We're talking about Aspen Valley Hospital, a liquor store, and a law office, among others. And the fact that someone who had once dominated the airwaves was now begging for more time to keep his house was truly heartbreaking. When news of the near foreclosure hit the media, fans were shocked. How could someone who had earned tens of millions end up bankrupt? How could someone so successful almost lose everything just because of a missed payment? Tabloid newspapers began buzzing. Reporters called it the greatest from riches to rags moment, and Don's reputation took a heavy blow. But the story didn't end there. In 2008, Don sued a production company called Racher Entertainment for $23 million, claiming they hadn't paid him the royalties from Nash Bridges. Why did he sue? Because he truly needed the money. He argued that the show had earned over $1 billion from distribution and rerun contracts, and he wanted his fair share. It was a complicated and lengthy legal battle, but in the end, Don won. The jury awarded him $23.2 million, and it was like a financial lifeline just when he was sinking. But by that time, Don had been through so many ups and downs, and that money couldn't erase his reputation for lavish spending. Let's not forget, Don also had a long history with famous women, and those relationships were anything but cheap. There were multiple divorces, child support payments, luxurious dinners, and everything was top of the line. As Don entered his 60s, there were whispers around Hollywood that he was past his prime. Studios weren't calling him as much anymore. The film offers grew fewer, and getting older in Hollywood can truly be brutal, especially for someone who had built his career on his good looks. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was also about presence, and it seemed like Don was slowly fading away. But just when everything seemed to hit rock bottom, Don Johnson surprised everyone. He didn't give up. He didn't disappear. Instead, he slowly and smartly made his way back into the spotlight. But this time, not to be the charming heartthrob or leading man. It was to become the wise, cool, older man who had been through it all. He took on roles in shows like Eastbound and Down, appeared in movies, and in 2024, he starred in a Netflix original film, Rebel Ridge. That film introduced him to a new generation of fans, and just like that, he had a resurgence. Now, at 75, Don Johnson is a survivor. He's no longer the reckless party boy, getting drunk every day, or the broke star begging the bank to save his house. He's someone who has gone through addiction, scandals, lawsuits, and financial bankruptcy, yet still found a way to stand tall. He takes pride in his sobriety. He's close with his children. He's embraced the ups and downs of his journey. And truly, there's something very powerful about that. Looking back, it's clear that his downfall started when he began living a lifestyle that his income couldn't sustain. He had the mansions, the luxury goods, and the glamour. But what he lacked was a solid plan. He never slowed down to build financial security, no emergency fund, no long-term asset management, just spending based on reputation and blind trust in the wrong people. So, what do you think about Don Johnson's life story? Do you think he can truly bounce back after such financial struggles? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you find inspiration in his recovery journey? Don't forget to like if you enjoyed this video, and if you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to hit that subscribe button to stay updated on more exciting videos coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.